And so whatever your background, whether that's engineering, policy, law, or business, we hope that these conversations spark your interest, spur you to ask more questions, and ultimately build that foundation necessary to dedicating your career to achieving climate commitments. And so with this in mind, I'm extremely excited to introduce our first keynote speaker, Chris Shelton. Chris is the Senior Vice President and Chief Product Officer of AES and the President of AES Next, where he has been responsible for identifying and integrating new customer solutions. Chris has been a key part of pivoting AES from a traditional coal-heavy utility to an industry leader in decarbonization, specifically through his role in the acquisition and integration of the company's solar team. Chris will be in conversation with our very own Professor Bonnier of the Nicholas School of Environment. Professor Bonnier is the Julie Plant Granger Associate Professor of Energy Economics and Policy and the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Initiatives. She also teaches the highly popular Energy Economics and Policy course at the Nicholas School. And without further ado, I'm extremely excited to turn it over to Professor Bonnier. Professor, welcome.
So thank you, Brandon, for those amazing opening remarks that really set the stage for our conversation today. And thank you, Chris, for joining us. So Chris, AES's motto is accelerating the future of energy. Can you tell us a little about the history of AES and how the company evolved to be a leader in decarbonizing electricity?
Sure, and good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and we're excited to sponsor the event. Our purpose of AES is accelerating the future of energy together. So that's the whole purpose statement. And inside that, a purpose statement obviously always should inspire and focus a company. And so for us, what that means is we really want to focus on accelerating the transition that the world is seeking around energy. And we think the resolve is there, and I can talk more about that. But we really want to focus on accelerating the transition. We want to understand what the future of energy can be and really focus on trying to pull that into the present as quickly as possible, obviously in a prudent fashion. And then together means we realize that this challenge is so daunting that while single actors can inspire us and encourage us to bold action, in the end, we are not going to accomplish this if we don't work together and if we don't build ecosystems and networks of change. And so largely the future of energy, we think, for the electric system is wind, solar, and battery. That's one of the things that we need to accelerate. There are many more. And so we could talk about that. And in terms of the history of the company, AES came into being out of the idea that competition should be brought into the electric system. Before AES and a few other companies around the same time started to provide power generation to the electric system, it was a complete monopoly. That was 1981 when we were founded. We were founded by Roger Sant, and the founders were driving change into the industry. In this case, it was competition as a form of change, and the future of energy was competitive in their view. And today we've taken on the challenge of bringing and decarbonizing energy and turning over the complete supply stack of energy to all be 100% clean energy. So the DNA of the company is really that entrepreneurial spirit, and inside of a conservative industry. And we've been able to get a lot done and to get a lot of change done in a prudent way, but to bring more competitive, lower cost, and now cleaner solutions into the system. So we think this differentiates us. Today, we are among the largest builders of wind and solar energy in the US and globally. We are targeting about 5,000 megawatts this year, and we hope to continue doing that and growing that over time. And about 4,000 megawatts of that is in the US. In addition to that, we're working with some of the largest consumers of energy in the RE100 with Google and Microsoft and others. And we're developing 24/7 carbon-free energy solutions where we can track the consumption for those customers and guarantee that it's carbon free on an hourly basis. This is really raising the standard of clean energy with like a full additionality and a full support and tracking hourly, which we think is critical to actually achieving full decarbonization. On top of that, as we're doing the massive deployment of those clean solutions, we're looking for technology vectors and technology platforms that can be pillars of the transition for the whole industry. And we recently IPO'd one of our companies that are one of these platforms. It's called Fluence, IPO'd 2 weeks ago, and it's battery and AI solutions for the clean energy transition. So, like I said, I think the resolve is there, and what that means is, we need to realize that electricity is central to the decarbonization, and AES being in this position of both deploying as quickly as possible the solutions that we know work, as well as developing new technology platforms to serve the whole industry, we think makes AES a great place to work. It's one of the reasons I've spent my whole career at AES. And so we end up having a very complex, challenging set of problems to work on at AES. We get to work with great other companies out there like Google and Microsoft and many others. And so it's very challenging, meaningful, and a great place to grow as a result.
That's a great introduction to some of the topics I want to ask you about. You already mentioned Fluence and its highly successful IPO recently. Can you talk a little bit more about Fluence and the technology and why it's so important as we think about decarbonizing the electricity sector?
Yeah, I will speak in a very limited way about Fluence because we just did the IPO, and I'm on the board of Fluence, and so it's just the facts here, and not an objective to solicit any investment or trading around Fluence at all. I just want to be very clear on that. So the IPO happened week before last. It was the culmination of 14 years of vision and hard work by teams at AES, and then eventually we also joined forces with Siemens with their energy storage team in the last 3.5 years. So Fluence was the originator of the Fluence team that was inside of AES originated the lithium-ion battery solution for the electric grid. So they built commissioned the very first electric grid system made of lithium-ion batteries in 2007. They hold many of the patents around that. The first system was online in February of 2008, and it launched the idea that lithium-ion batteries could replace power plant services on the grid, and then eventually we thought someday could augment renewables and transmission, and 14 years later we're seeing that that's happening. It's starting to happen at scale. It's a great industry. It's hitting an inflection point at a very important time for the deployment of wind and solar, and so it creates this great combination of wind, solar, and battery that 10 years ago was just a white paper. So we're very excited about that. It's very meaningful for me personally, and the whole work that we did with batteries and the idea of spinning out and creating Fluence to be this platform to serve the whole world. Fluence sells batteries in 28 countries to many of AES's peers. This idea of making these platforms created what we call AES Next, and we've had other investments that we've done. Another platform that is just valued recently at a 1.5 billion valuation is Uplight. There we're partnering with Schneider Electric. This is a digital platform for customer engagement to drive efficiency and demand capabilities for utilities. Another is an investment in a company called 5B that's transforming the way that we build solar so that it uses half the land, can be deployed in a third of the time. And we're also working on a EV adoption platform for utilities called Motor. So those are kind of the pipeline of things that we hope that will someday to grow up to be like Fluence.
Great, thank you. You also talked in your opening comments about partnering with other major industry players in developing technologies that are sort of good for the whole industry. So in that spirit, you have a project with Google, or actually with X. It's called Tapestry, and it's a grid visualization tool. So the rest of us, what is grid visualization, and why is it so important to help the U.S. meet its climate commitments?
Yeah, it's actually virtualization.
Virtualization.
So, grid,
that's what it
grid
says in my notes.
virtualization.
And I said visualization. My apologies.
Yeah, sorry. So, grid virtualization is about using AI to build models of the grid. And this is very consistent, again, with our purpose, accelerating the future of energy together. We're working closely with X to do this. We've announced what we're doing in our utilities in the US, and then also collaborating in Chile as well. But you could think of it as the idea of it's the internetification of energy. You know, if you think about the way the internet works today, we don't actually plan the internet. The electric grid is highly planned. And so this is actually an impediment to the energy transition. It actually makes things very slow and inefficient and costly. So if you think about it, if you buy a device from, Best Buy or Amazon, if you want to hook it up to the internet, you just plug it in. You don't call anyone. You don't have to fill out any paperwork. Nobody studies whether that's going to cause a problem on the internet. And so that's kind of the vision that we have for working with the Tapestry team. And what you do is you have to realize the grid as it exists today is largely similar to the way it was before telecom and computing was invented. So if you just took all the telemetry off the grid, it would work the same way it did let's say in 1920. So we are, in a situation where, how do you build a system like that? Well, you have to overbuild it, and you actually can't control anything that happens on that system. The electrons go where they want. And so the challenge is we could rebuild the whole thing and put the right type of controls and telemetry in, but that doesn't seem practical. So what the Tapestry technology can do is help us use disparate information sources and information about the grid itself and physics, and model that in a more precise way that drives better planning and better real-time operation. And let me give you an example of the issue that we have. I would ask you a question, and then I'll give you a story to answer it. How long do you think it should take to connect a new power resource to the grid? Let's say a solar farm, if we were putting one in North Carolina or in New York or somewhere, how long should it take to figure out whether that is permitted or not? It's something to think about for a minute. Well, on average, it's taking in excess of 2 years to do that, to just put one resource on the grid. It needs to be studied. Several $100,000 need to be paid to consultants to analyze it. And the reason for that is if you get it wrong, the consequences could be dire. And so when we were first putting the battery, an example of this, we wanted to connect an 8 megawatt battery in New York a few years ago, back when we were starting the energy storage team that became Fluence. And in the same month, we filed an interconnection for that 8 megawatt battery and a patent around the battery that we were building. We were awarded the patent before we were awarded the right to connect to the electric grid. So what Tapestry is hoping to do, and we want to prove this out by working together with the X team, is build the model so that we plan the system better to prevent that type of delay, as well as we have a better state awareness of the grid itself so that it can deal with errors in a better fashion. So then you can more readily connect wind and solar assets and distributed energy resources in a way like you do the internet. If you want to put a data center on the internet, or you want to put a building on the internet, there's no interconnection process. You just connect. And because of the way the system is built and the protocols, it protects itself. And that's where we want to get to with the grid.
Great. One last question for me before I turn to questions from the audience, because they are coming in rapidly. And if you haven't sent in yours, use your little QR code. But my last question is about the relationship really between government action and private enterprise. So there's a lot of talk right now in DC with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that just passed this week, and with the Build Back Better bill that is still under consideration, and also, of course, internationally with the Conference of the Parties that's happening right now in Scotland. So from your perspective, what role, if any, do companies like AES want the government to play in facilitating rapid deployment of existing technologies like solar, wind, and batteries to decarbonize electricity?
Yeah, I think we would filter that through, what has worked. So which programs do we think have historically been effective and fit the context that we're in and are good roles for government? So I'll mention three, considerations, and then what we think that means for policy. So first, we think the resolve is there around the energy transition and around climate change. So it's not exactly what we all want, but it's clear, and the introductory comments today show this, that, we want more out of the COP meetings than we usually end up getting, but it's incredible where we are. The resolve, from 5 years ago, this is very different. All of business is committed to this now. The banking and investing is committed to it. The governments are committed to it. They're not signing up to all the things that have teeth in them just yet, but it's we're in a stage where it's we need to get on with it, and we have a lot of solutions that, from like a 90-10 rule, are available to us and are cost effective, and electricity is central to all of the cases. So this is not a question. There's a resolve around that as well. So second, I think, since electricity is central, we need to go with what we know is working and the things have been paying dividends. So wind, solar, and battery are on experience curves, particularly solar and battery. This is incredible. And the role of government was to spur the volume that got us onto those experience curves. So anything that encourages the continued adoption of those solutions, we think can get us to 90% decarbonization of the grid as it sits today without any breakthroughs, and it can happen very rapidly. But we do need things like some technologies like Tapestry and others to come along to help that process go faster. That's why we're focused on that, because we believe this second point about wind, solar, and battery. So obviously, some of the best policy in the world has been the investment tax credits, and we're hopeful that in the next couple of months here, all those will get renewed, even with additional incentives embedded. Third is hopefully we're still connected. I just lost the video. It's back now, sorry. So third, we need to decarbonize the non-grid uses of energy. So we have to start to scale those solutions for the next decade. So that EVs can be electrified. So that process is underway, and I think you're going to hear more about that today. But that essentially leaves industrial loads, heating, agriculture, shipping, aviation. We need to solve these. We do have technologies that can solve them. Green hydrogen, ammonia, and any electro fuels that can be derived from hydrogen can be zero carbon. So, and if with an appropriate carbon policy, we think by 2030 that green hydrogen becomes competitive, with a, let's say, $50 price on carbon. And so at that point, you have the full set to solve a net zero by 2050 objective. Now, could we have some breakthroughs? Do we want breakthroughs? Absolutely. So let's talk about what the policies are. So those are the three premises we would have. Policy-wise, we got to support the rapid deployment of wind, solar, and battery to decarbonize the grid 90% as soon as possible. We should set a very aggressive target, 2030, 2035. We need to add hydrogen to the mix in a meaningful way, and the policies should drive the experience curve for hydrogen the same way they drove the experience curve for wind, solar, and battery. So we don't want big, clunky solutions. We want factory-made technology like electrolyzers, in our view. We need to put a sustainable price on carbon, as I mentioned, and yes, we should ramp up some R&D, but we shouldn't bet the farm on R&D. R&D is more for the next half of the century than it's going to be for this half of the century. So those are our views on the policy.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to turn now to questions from the audience. Some of you only gave me first names, so some gave me both, so I'll use what I have. Aaron asked, as a utility, there's a major focus on reliability. Do you think there are other technologies beyond wind, solar, and storage that are needed to maintain reliability in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the demand side is a big one. I mentioned uplight. So, the demand side is critical. That I think wind, solar, and battery, as I said, could do 90%. The last 10% is, in anything, and a 90-10 is very hard to solve. But the demand side plays a huge role in all of the models for net zero by 2050. It's massive. And so that's why we're invested in uplight. Uplight is, serving about utilities that represent about 75% of the footprint of the United States electric system, with energy efficiency, demand response, and other capabilities that all those utilities are seeking. So huge, very important. The other is transmission. If we really want to scale wind, solar, and battery and have it have a 24/7 type profile, we have to have more transmission. And it's probably going to be the most limiting factor for wind, solar, and battery deployment in the next 5 years, I would say. And then, but we're seeing policies come through in Congress right now that are being very supportive of transmission. So that's a good signal.
Great, thanks. From Jennifer Stutzman, we have, what solutions are you working on for emerging markets that do not have existing grids, or maybe have limited existing grids?
Well, in terms of which technologies do I think make sense, it's solar and battery. By far, that is the standout for any place that has any level of sun. And so, there's just going to be more and more places where solar and battery can be the solution. We actually are, we do a little bit of kind of philanthropic work around those types of solutions, but we're largely in developing and developed countries where, we're not doing that type of first electrification. But the technology for that, in our views, is solar battery for sure.
Okay. Great. We have a couple questions on Fluence that I'm going to try to put together. So from both Ryan and Nick, there's questions about just the many years process in launching Fluence. So Nick notes that it was a 14-year journey and is curious what kind of difficulties you had along the way, while Ryan is interested in your decision to launch Fluence and why you chose Siemens as a partner.
Yeah, great questions. So this is one of the things that we started inside AES. And I was, had a first person experience in that. I was on the founding team that started our energy storage effort. And it was me and one other colleague at the very beginning, and we added a couple of people. So the first year it was just 4 of us. And I would say the most important thing when you're working inside of an existing company is to really understand innovation theory and what really makes corporations tick, especially public companies. So one of the things that we learned, and this is through innovation theory as well as through direct experience, is no matter how good an idea is, it's really hard for it to lose money in more than 2 business cycles or more than 2 budget cycles, let's say. So that means you have to craft the profile of what you're developing to find a niche proof in 3 years. That's your maximum amount of time that you have, because you could start at the beginning of 1 year, go through one budget cycle where you're losing money. You could go a whole year and go through another budget cycle where you're losing money. And you have one more year to show up and say, we've proven something. So that's a decent amount of time, especially when you have the resources of a corporation. So the nice thing about those 3 years is you have an office. You can easily make payroll. You have computers and laptops and cell phones and travel budgets. And so there's huge benefits of being in that environment. You're not out raising money every 3 months. You raise money by filling out a spreadsheet every 12 months. So that's much easier than going on the road and trying to raise capital. So, that's been the experience in AES. I think it could be that way in many other companies. Many companies probably wouldn't even get that far. So the other thing there is you don't have to prove the whole story. You just need to prove the next part of the story in that 3 years. And so you got to convince people that the unit economics work, let's say, or that the technical element is approved. So, but that you have 3 years to show money somewhere. That's one huge lesson. And that we take that today for AES Next. We carve out the proofs around technical viability, engineering viability, what we call unit viability, and then we do commercial viability in terms of the scale of the business. That's how we develop all of our new platforms. So that's the experience. In terms of Siemens, we had ambitions to make sure that energy storage scaled globally, and AES is only growing in about 12 countries. And so we didn't want to only have this battery solution just for AES when we knew we needed to do the energy transition. So we built a strategy to have a product business, and we thought Siemens would be among the absolute best channel partners you could possibly have for that type of business. That's why we partnered with Siemens.
Great. Question from Chris. I suspect I know which Chris, given the question. When you look at the nascent technologies that are hot and in the news now, which ones do you think might be IPOing 10 to 15 years from now?
This is a great question. I think, 10 to 15 years from now. So definitely maybe 8 years from now, I think it would be solar technology innovations, either around design or new technologies around solar. So that's an area that I think is definitely interesting. I think electric AV, this is like personal, it's not something that AES is working on necessarily, but I think electric aviation for short haul is going to be viable. And we may see a ton of that coming. It's an exciting area to keep an eye on because I think the technology is just there. It needs to be applied in the right business model to deal with the cost structures and other elements. And it needs to be developed into kind of like a blue ocean solution where you have capabilities that you might not otherwise have for short haul aviation. So it could create a great experience for customers, let's say. And if you had frequency of flights, it could be interesting. So that's an area that I think if somebody's looking for a totally new area, I think that's ripe to be quite interesting. The whole electrofuels area and the finding ways to get carbon to combine with clean hydrogen, that makes sense. I mean, this is a challenge, but I think that's another area I would keep my eye on. Electrofuels will be the next phase. It won't just be hydrogen. It's how to make the hydrogen useful within the existing plant, right? Because we don't want to have to replace every point of consumption with a new point of consumption. That just takes too long. We don't have time for that. We've got to find a way to use the existing points of consumption with synthetic fuels.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one more, which is actually going to be a double again. From Liz Kayleys, do you have concerns about the environmental impacts of increased lithium mining to facilitate energy storage? One of the nation's largest lithium mines is being proposed here in North Carolina. And then Stephen follows up on a related note. Do you think that there are better battery chemistries available that need to be scaled up?
Yeah, so on the first question, I think the mining of lithium, lithium is about 2.5% of a battery, the lithium-ion battery by volume. You have other things in there like copper and aluminum that are the vast majority of the mass of that. So from a mining perspective, it's not going to just be lithium, it's copper and aluminum and everything else. So I think that is a general problem of the world, one that has been with us and persisted. And so it's one that we all need to continue to improve, right? So we need to recycle more of everything that we use. And so I think the fact that a lot of copper and aluminum are in batteries will make recycling them make a lot of sense. And so then you can grab all the different components out of them. So there are lots of companies trying to do that now. So on the second question, in terms of supply of lithium, by the way, I think we work in Chile. We're decarbonizing the mining of copper and lithium in Chile in the Atacama Desert. Those are our customers, and that's a big part of the transition we're making there. And there's a massive amount of supply of copper and lithium ion in Chile, and Chile has been a very commercialized approach to that. They're not hoarding it. It's there's lots of investment being made, and they do like 30% of the world's copper. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in existing mining locations. And so on new technologies, I think there are a lot of interesting chemistries. The multi-day storage work is interesting. It really is for a completely different application than a daily type service, and it could round out that last 10% that I keep leaving out there in my comments. So things like Form Energy are interesting, in trying to solve that last 10%. I think also, hydrogen as a demand source for off-grid uses of hydrogen creates a nice flex to help solve that last 10% as well. So, that I think Form plays into that, as well as hydrogen as a demand where you can, take the excess energy you might have from overbuilding renewables for the grid and put them into a hydrogen use. So, but lots of, I think the most exciting innovations in battery will be incremental improvements to lithium ion that keep driving the experience curve, because that supply chain is already at scale and we need things at scale. So we don't have time to go through 15 years to find the next battery.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for launching today with our first keynote address. And to the students here, if you were listening to that and you don't think, this is what I want to do, I get to work on the world's most important problem through technology, AI, cool stuff, then I'm pretty sure you weren't listening to the same talk I was just listening to. So thank you so much, Chris, for that. And with that, I'm going to welcome Brandon back up to the stage, who will tell us what's next on our agenda.